I'm going to talk a little bit about Pompeii today and being gay in Pompeii. And just to refresh your memory, everyone knows what happened in Pompeii, don't they? If you don't, you must live under a volcano or something. But in 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted. It spewed ash, pumice, and toxic gases into the sky, which then fell on the town. I think it's a town, isn't it, of Pompeii. Yeah. And many people died quite quickly, but many died pretty horrific deaths. And there was obviously intense heat, there were gases, there were ash clouds, which could reach up to about 250 degrees Celsius, which is 482 Fahrenheit. There you go, Americans, don't say I don't do nothing for you. And then over time, thick layers of ash and pumice covered the city and encased all the bodies, protecting them from decaying, and it cut off the oxygen and moisture. So that's why we get things like this, because over the centuries, these bodies decomposed and they left empty cavities in the shape of the people who died. And archaeologists found these cavities and poured plaster into these voids and created basically casts of the people in their final positions of death. And I think these are some of the most haunting things, the most harrowing things that exists on planet Earth. Because you see entire families here, in their last moments together, cowering in fear, probably in agony. And when I was preparing this segment, I actually had to get up and walk away, because it's one of those things where if you put yourself in the shoes of those people, the sheer horror of you and everyone you know dies a sudden, horrific, agonizing death that cannot be escaped. And you watch it happen, and everyone you know and love dies with you.
Suffocating and or burning to death, yeah. Being crushed to death by pumice and stuff, yeah. It would have been a horrible way to go, yeah.
Yeah.
Terrifying, horrible.
And so that's part of the reason why people are so interested in Pompeii. Not only is it a good window into, ancient Rome, but also the human tragedy of it. And
as you see there's little kids, dogs, cats, all sorts of things.
It's a tremendously sad thing, and I feel like that aspect of it isn't necessarily emphasised enough. I know they're almost 2,000 years old now, but there are still human beings, still worthy of respect and dignity. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. This is one of the more famous ones. They're often referred to as the lovers, because they're sort of embracing in death. And I'm going to talk about a Daily Mail article that is reporting on some recent research. And I'm going to look at the article first, and then we're going to actually look at the research, because the two are not the same.
So, can I say a quick couple
of course. Yeah, go ahead.
I've actually been to Pompeii twice. It's in the Bay of Naples, of course. And Pliny writes about it very movingly. He was killed in it, in fact. And wait, how can that be?
There are multiple Plinies.
It's Pliny the Elder.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, he wrote about it and then didn't escape quickly enough, and later his records
spent too much time writing.
That's right. Is that right? Anyway, you can read about it by Pliny, and but I've been there twice. And Herculaneum, which is a smaller town, which is right, or Herculano as they call it, the Italians call it today, but it was Herculaneum, and that's right under Mount Vesuvius. I've even been up Mount Vesuvius and looked down into the crater and stuff, and the whole top of the mountain blew off. A bit like Mount St Helens, where half the mountain blows up, and massive chunk of the Bay of Naples was completely covered. And even if you go down to like Sorrento, there's meters and meters and meters of pumice. So the people at Herculaneum and Pompeii were covered in houses tall amounts of pumice. It's not that they just sort of choked to death a bit, or it got a bit too hot and they died. No, they were completely covered by meters and meters of pumice.
Sorry, carry on.
No, go on.
I was just going to say on the Pliny thing. Yeah, Pliny the Elder died at Mount Vesuvius, at Pompeii, when Mount Vesuvius went off, and was actually there stationed with the Roman Navy and organised a rescue mission, and ended up as part of that asphyxiating.
Right. That's right. So yeah, he was
trying to save people.
I remember the story now. He was on the other side of. I think he was on the other side of the Bay of Naples. Saw it happen. Wrote an account of it. And when he really should have been running the other way at that point, he went towards it, and then got caught up.
Yeah, supposedly...
They later found his account. Yeah, so anyway.
It says, the helmsman advised turning back, to which he replied, fortune favours the bold.
Famous last
Not
words.
always. Yeah, not always.
Admirable spirit, though.
Yeah,
The last thing I'll say before I sort of let you carry on with the story and the take is that Herculaneum is an incredible thing, because Pompeii is usually filled with tourists. I do advise anyone that goes to Naples to visit Herculaneum. But Pompeii itself is it's honestly an incredible thing, because it's like a snapshot of the 1st century AD. You know, it's a snapshot in time that's been frozen in time, you know. And there's a lot of it that's still left unexcavated, loads left unexcavated. If I found myself absolute tyrant of Italy at some point, I would, because there's a modern town built on top of a lot of...
I would like to know the circumstances that left you tyrant of Italy.
We can only guess at what might happen.
We can only hope.
But there's a modern town built on still a lot of the ruins of Pompeii. You can't just evict these people, but if I was a complete tyrant,
You would.
I'd evict them and get the rest of Pompeii excavated, because there's still loads under there to be found.
Still makes you a better tyrant than most Western leaders today. You're being mean to people for the sake of archaeology.
I'd rehouse them somewhere better. How about that? Can we make that deal? I'll give you a
Good
better
idea, yeah.
home so that we can excavate the rest of Pompeii.
Plenty of homes in Italy. Anyway. Loads of vacant homes.
But the human side of it, is really harrowing. I remember first becoming aware of it, the plaster casts of the dead people, when I was a child, and being sort of haunted is a bit much, but, you know, affecting me a bit. Because, as you say, let's never ever forget that these are real people in their last death agonies. And quite often, nearly a lot of the time, they're huddled together, as you would be. You know, there's a pyroclastic flow on the way, or you're being buried by pumice, being burnt alive and asphyxiated. You probably would huddle in a corner with all the other people in that room, probably, wouldn't you? At Herculaneum, down by what would have been a quayside, it's not really that near the sea anymore, but back then it was. There's loads and loads and loads of bodies were found all there, where people had rushed down to the water's edge to try and escape, or to try and do whatever they can to survive a moment longer. And they were all killed there, filled with bodies. You can go down the sea, and it's a horrific thing, yeah. So I just wanted to point that out.
I think that's
before we carry on, that these were real people, and they suffered terrible, terrible deaths.
And I think that's a good segue into this.
2,000 years down the line, they're being slandered.
The 2 maidens of Pompeii may have been gay lovers, scientists say. Whenever something says scientists say, scientists don't say.
Yeah.
As a scientist myself, scientists disagree about the most petty of nonsense. Scientists are very rarely in agreement about anything, really.
He's a massive contrarian.
Exactly.
And when they say may have been, you mean almost certainly weren't.
Mm-hmm.
They may have been transgender. They may have been gay. Someone from deep in history. Yeah. What you mean is almost certainly weren't. Okay.
So this is talking about reanalyzing some of the figures that were, particularly these ones. And I'm going to read what the Daily Mail says, and then I'm going to go to the original paper. And then I'm going to sort of do a wall of shame, who reported it badly, and then a wall of good of the people who did well. Because, I'm going to talk about journalistic integrity.
Wall of good. It's not the most poetic way of putting it.
Wall of goodness.
Like Eliot Ness, let's do some good.
I mean, what the wall of shame, the wall of
pride.
That word's got a bit of a taint to it.
No, I suppose when you're talking about this
is the wall of pride.
Wall of glory.
Yeah,
there
we go. But anyway, I'll scroll down just so you can read along. Why not? So it says, new DNA analysis of the body suggests that the iconic pair might need a new name. Researchers from the Max Planck Institute found that at least one, if not both of the people, were men. Notice the wording, at least one, if not both. So
still not got any idea.
So that means we know that one probably was, the other...
Mm-hmm. So it says, David Reich, one of the authors of the new study, said a pair of individuals thought to be sisters or mother and daughter were found to include at least one genetic male. These findings challenge traditional gender and familial assumptions.
No, they don't. No, they don't.
What are you on about?
What that one sentence does not follow on to the other.
I agree. While the true nature of their relationship remains unclear, experts say they may have been gay lovers. How can you tell that? You don't have the evidence to back that up. Massimo Osana...
Who is the expert that they've consulted on this?
I don't know. But Massimo Osana, superintendent of the Pompeii archaeological site, previously said the fact that they were lovers is a hypothesis that cannot be dismissed. So there are two hypotheses here. One, that they were gay, which you have no evidence for, and one that they were lovers, which, you know, even if it were a stranger, in the last minutes, you know, just some comfort from another human being when you're inevitably facing death could be a good enough explanation. They don't even have to be lovers necessarily. With the
same legitimacy and validity, your hypothesis there similarly can't be dismissed because we don't know.
Mm-hmm. So let's have a look at the actual research paper. So unfortunately, the paper itself, you can't access the full thing, so we're just going to have to read the abstract. And if you humour me in reading this, I'll try and read it quite quickly. From skeletal material embedded in the cast, we generated genome-wide ancient DNA and strontium isotopic data, so it's basically, you know, dating it, to characterise...
That's why it's the Max Planck Institute, so actual advanced physics. I wondered why they had anything to do with this.
I know, yeah.
Okay, got it, okay.
The genetic relationship, sex, ancestry and mobility of 5 individuals, we show that the individuals' sexes and family relationships do not match the traditional interpretations, exemplifying how modern assumptions about gendered behaviours may not be a reliable lens through which to view data from the past. So there is a bit of wokery in here, but what I think is going on here is they've done actual good research and they've done genomic analysis, but the interpretation of that stuff and how it's being presented is basically wokeified, so it gets picked up by media, so they get more funding. And this is one of those things that unfortunately does go on in academia.
The funny thing about that very sentence is that modern assumptions about gendered behaviours is that everybody's gay. All the time, everywhere, even if they're married.
Don't even know it.
Yeah, even if they're married with children, they'll probably do some buggering on the weekend when no one's paying any attention. That's the modern assumption.
Mm-hmm. But the point being here that it doesn't necessarily have to be a modern assumption. It's just that people didn't know their relationships with one another, and so people made up stories in the same way that people don't know what the stars were and therefore created pictures and constellations to tell a story, to understand them better. It's a similar sort of thing. It's just human beings imprinting on the world what we see and believe, isn't it? And of course, the genomic analysis is valuable. This paper is useful to the world, but how some of it is presented is bad. And it says, for example, an adult wearing a golden bracelet with a child on their lap, often interpreted as a mother and child, is genetically an adult male and biologically unrelated to the child. I lost my line. Similarly, a pair of individuals who are thought to have died in an embrace, often interpreted as sisters, included at least one genetic male. So that's implying that it could have potentially been heterosexual lovers. Just throwing that one out there. All Pompeians with genome-wide data consistently derive their ancestry largely from recent immigrants from the Eastern Mediterranean, as has also been seen in contemporaneous ancient genomes of the city of Rome, underscoring the cosmopolitanism of the Roman Empire in this period. So there's another it's talking about multiculturalism.
Well, yeah, but there was basically loads and loads and loads of manumission slaves back then, just given their freedom, taken from places like Syria and Levant, bring them over to Rome, you're a slave, and then we'll give you freedom.
The Eastern Mediterranean isn't that far away, and it was part of the Roman Empire, so it's a bit of a strange thing to say. Yes,
well,
there were some people from, maybe Greece, maybe the Adriatic. It's not that far-fetched.
Well, when they say cosmopolitanism, what they want you to think is scores and scores and scores of sub-Saharan Africans.
Mm-hmm. Which, of course, didn't happen. So, obviously, what is presented here is slightly different than the Daily Mail article. They're not saying, we found some gay lovers, are they? They're saying, these two people, one of them was a man, probably. We're not so sure about the other one. It's harder to date them because, of course, they found little bits of skeleton remaining, but obviously in the manner in which they died, there's not going to be much biological material left for them to analyse, and so it would be difficult to do.
Well, that's interesting. Again, that's why I guess they need sort of at the microscopic level, again, advanced physics, the Max Planck Institute. Because when you the other day told me, I said, or we was a bit confused, like how can that be? Because there isn't anything of the body left. That's the nature of it, that it's a plaster cast of a hollow. The body itself was sort of annihilated, but obviously not completely. Obviously there's I would have thought tiny fragments of things are left in the pumice.
It's a shame, really, that
it's still not even enough for the Max Planck Institute to be sure about them all. So
it's a shame that such great research is being wrapped up in stuff like this, because it need not be. I mean, you're doing great work. It should stand on its own legs.
For confirmation of this new gay theory, they need to take the next step and do another genome examination to see if they can find that one of the remains had the gay gene.
Yeah, well.
Then we'll know. If we can't find it, then we've got to say no.
So let's look at the wall of shame, shall we? The Metro.
Of course.
You can't even see because they've got an annoying banner. You can't even see it's the Metro. They're so embarrassed they're covering themselves. But Pompeii's famous 2 maidens were actually men and might have been gay lovers, in brackets.
That's just a lie.
The Metro is the pits. I commuted to London for years, best part of 20 years. I remember when Metro first came out and stuff. It's honestly, it's like the Evening Standard or worse.
I wouldn't wrap my chips in it. Yeah.
It's the one of the most subversive rags it's possible to get.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, Pink News, were the 2 maidens of Pompeii actually gay lovers? It's certainly possible. So actually Pink News said, well, it's possible. So they've got more uncertainty, Pink News of all organisations, than the Mail and Metro there. Which I just thought was interesting. They've got the most reason to present it as unequivocal, but there we go. And then we have another one here. This is Indian News. Scientists claim Pompeii's 2 maidens were probably gay lovers. I think that's them anyway. It is an Indian outlet. And then here's the Telegraph. Embracing figures at Pompeii could have been gay lovers after scan reveals they are both men. It didn't.
They didn't even go as far as to just read the sentence in the summary.
Yeah, in the abstract. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's journalists' scientific literacy is basically zero.
They can't even read a summary.
Now I'm basically both a scientist and a journalist. It drives me even more mad than it already did. I already hated journalists as a scientist, both because of my politics and the fact I was one. And this just makes me even more mad.
For the pure sake of honesty, the fact that they've said both men infuriates me.
Well, there's no evidence. I just care about respecting history. History is important. You have to get it right. You can't just misrepresent it like this. The Week here, Pompeii DNA analysis explained volcano victims, the 2 maidens were gay lovers, ? No.
It's like they could have been gay lovers. Okay, they could have been anything.
They could have had green skin with yellow spots.
Yeah.
They could have been in the middle of a rugby tackle.
Right, yeah.
Literally anything.
Could have been anything.
It could have been a mugging.
They could have been 2 orangutans. Who knows? It'd be a bit weird. And I'd like to point this out because this went a little bit viral, this 4chan post, which got turned into a meme of the headline, if you're listening, embracing figures at Pompeii could have been gay lovers after scan reveals they are both men. And it says, be me, drinking wine with best bro, served 10 years in the army together, saved my life once, named my son after the guy, mounting explodes, find house and hide for shelter, give each other one last bro hug, ash buries us both. 1,900 years later, get found, lol, gay boys.
Yeah.
Just the imposition.
This really is the same as the Scandinavian. Well, we found her buried with a sword, so she must have been a warrior.
Spoilers.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's true. We're only going to brush over it anyway. So let's look at the Wall of Honour, shall we? The Telegraph eventually corrected itself. Pompeii's 2 maidens locked in dying embrace are heterosexual couple, DNA analysis suggests.
But to draw another parallel to something, the damage from those other headlines may already be done, because you know that people are going to spam if you say anything about how pride parades are bad, or anything like that. Somebody's going to spam, gays in Pompeii headline to you, the same way that if you say, well, Africans haven't really got a history in the UK, they'll spam, Cheddar Man was black, which was also a hoax.
It was, yeah. So here's another one. The Washington Post, of all people. Science is revealing the true stories of Pompeii's victims beneath the ash. They don't even talk about it. They're just talking about the fact that some of them were from the Eastern Mediterranean, and they talk about who these people were. It's actually quite well written. So there you go. Rare bit of praise for the Washington Post. Here's Science Daily. Obviously, they're going to be a bit better. DNA evidence rewrites story of people buried in Pompeii. They're talking more about the fact that they were from the Eastern Mediterranean than the actual sexes of the people. I can't remember which publication this one is.
It says Harvard on the top line there. HM.
Oh, yeah. I didn't
Edu.
read the URL. Computationally illiterate for some reason. Ancient DNA challenges stories told about Pompeii victims, and it's just saying it contradicts interpretations before we had the DNA evidence, which is fair enough. I imagine there's probably some wokeness within, but the title itself is okay. And just to sort of wrap up, I wanted to point out that this exists within a framework of lots of other reporting on archaeological finds being questionable. So here is one from The Guardian, of course. 1,000-year-old remains in Finland may be non-binary Iron Age leader. So what this is someone with Klinefelter syndrome, which is a condition in which male babies are born with an extra X chromosome. So this is a very atypical scenario, right? And I imagine...
Therefore non-binary.
Yeah, for some reason. But they have a biological problem. And they sort of were buried in a sort of confusing way in that they have swords, but also buried in feminine attire. And they also say that they are aristocratic, but they don't necessarily, the study doesn't necessarily say they were a leader definitively. It could well be, and I think my sort of instincts are telling me, this is just my speculation, that perhaps it was, the child of a wealthy elite family, and so they were taken good care of. They didn't necessarily have to, go out and fight, and so they had more, more comfortable,
more freedom,
detailed clothes. They probably had more freedom too, and when they were buried, they were given a less sex-typical thing because they were less sex-typical because of a biological condition. So this
and potentially just buried with weapons because it was an honourable thing.
Yeah, I think that using this very exceptional case to try and make judgments about the past and try and say, well, it's actually just modern bigotry that's suggesting this sort of thing is very misleading. And then you also have things like this 5,000-year-old transgender skeleton discovered, and this is someone, I think they're from the corded ware culture originally, and this was found in a suburb of Prague. And I'm going to read a little bit from this. So where's the text? Okay, somewhere down here. So it says, the body was believed to be dated between 2,900 and 2,500 BC, and men's bodies of that age and culture are usually found buried with their heads towards the west and with weapons, but this skeleton was found with its head towards the east and surrounded by domestic jugs, as women's bodies from the time are usually found. At a press conference in Prague yesterday, archaeologists theorised that the person may have been transgender or third sex, or they could have been buried in a way that was meant to dishonour them. Maybe they were craven. Maybe they had betrayed people. Maybe they were a criminal. There are lots of reasons not to give someone a conventional burial, and to suggest that is jumping to a conclusion. I mean, it could be possible, but I think it's unlikely, personally. I think it's imposing a modern value on the past in an anachronistic way. And then, finally, I wanted to point out this as well, that they're coming for Anglo-Saxons again. The assault on Anglo-Saxon history is unrelenting, and this is, of course, University of Liverpool, which is quite woke. And I'm just going to read a little bit. In the archaeology of the early Anglo-Saxon period in England, weaponry, horse-riding equipment and tools are thought to be signals of masculinity, while jewellery, sewing equipment and beads signal femininity, and for the most part the pattern fits. So far, though, no convincing explanation has been put forward for the burials which appear to invert the pattern. And he talks about my PhD research asks whether looking at these atypical gendered burials through the lens of trans theory and the 21st century language of transness has the potential to improve historians' understanding of the early Anglo-Saxon gender.
It
I
doesn't.
don't think so.
No.
And anyway, that's not even right. If you look at the Sutton Hoo burial, whether that was in fact King Raedwald or not, is buried with all sorts of jewellery and beads and all sorts of stuff. All sorts of stuff.
Again, it could be a sign of wealth and status.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all sorts of finery.
But University of Liverpool said not convincing. Not convincing. My PhD says the trans.
Yeah, and my
Yeah.
general my general point here is that all of this forced ideology just perverts history, and it's gross and it's disrespectful. And I think that you should do your best to follow what the evidence suggests. You know, I've not tried to impose my ideological beliefs on this. I'm just trying to go by what the evidence suggests here. And I think that people should do the same, because you should respect the people who came before as a matter of course, because it is the right way to conduct oneself. And that is not happening here, is it? It's being incredibly disrespectful.
To deliberately try and subvert or pervert, invert history is a terrible, terrible crime, in my opinion. Terrible, knowing that you're deliberately doing it.
It feels
if it's in good
sacrilegious,
faith,
doesn't it?
If he's doing it in good faith, and you actually think, oh, the narrative of history is incorrect because of this or that evidence, okay. But where it's obviously just partisan hackery, it's obviously just, it's just revolting, absolutely revolting behaviour.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Thanks for watching, folks. If you'd like to support us, go over to lotus.com and come and support our Christian content creators, such as Calvin Robinson, who does his Common Sense Crusade, in which he pontificates, as it were, about the fact that the church is basically not Christian anymore, and things are just going remarkably down the tubes since we left Christ. I'm not a Christian, but I do consider myself an ally. Also, go over and support us, follow us on lotuseaters_com on X, formerly Twitter, and get notified and updated of everything that we're doing. Thanks for joining us.